Hey guys, it's Alec Torelli, and this video was inspired by one of the emails that I received from one of my readers. I read all my email, but this short, poignant email really stuck with me. Here's what it says. I'm so tired of this downswing that it's affecting my game. Dude calls me off with a 9-deuce offsuit after flopping bottom pair and hits on the river. I want to quit. First off, my man, let's start by having an honest conversation here. You don't want to quit. You're just feeling pain right now, but what you really want is to win. You know that quitting is for losers. You want to actually get better at poker and become a winning player. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be going back to the table again. You wouldn't be trying to improve or writing me this email. Now, there's only really two possibilities here. One is that poker is not something that you actually care enough about to study and improve to break through that barrier to become better at. Or you're just actually a quitter, and every time things get difficult, your response to something that is challenging to you is not to test your capacity, and you're just going to quit and give up. Now, it's really important that you become clear about which one of these two that it is. If it's the former, and poker isn't something that's that important to you that you want to put in the time and effort that is required to succeed, that is fine. I've had many things like that in my life that I thought that I wanted to excel at, but upon actually attempting to do that through action, I realized it wasn't a priority. For example, when I moved to Italy and I was 24, one thing I really wanted to do while I was there was learn piano. So I bought a piano, I started taking lessons, but when it came time to having to practice 30 minutes or an hour a day, I just wasn't really willing to put in that time. So the first sign of what Randy Posh in his amazing last lecture calls a brick wall, I realized that that brick wall wasn't there to keep me out. It was to test how bad I really wanted it. It's a great quote from his lecture. And I didn't really want to learn piano badly enough to put in the time and sweat to get better. Poker may be like that for you if you find yourself wanting to quit or being frustrated after a session. But if it is something that is deeply important to you, like poker was for me in my life, there were no amount of brick walls that were going to stop me from becoming the best that I could or one of the best in the world. That was something that was a huge priority of mine. And you're still quitting at that sign, then there's a big problem, because then you're never going to be able to test your capacity as a person to see what you're capable of, because you're a quitter as a person. So there's a huge difference here between quitting something that is not truly your purpose or truly your path and allowing that distraction to get you more focused on what is important, or quitting something that you actually believe is something that's deeply important to you. And I challenge you out there watching to get clear on which one of these it actually is when you do hit that brick wall. Because brick walls will come, but again, they're not there to keep you out. They're there to test how bad you really want it. So that's my first sort of perspective on this subject. But I'd like to address three different things about these particular bad beats and feeling frustrated in poker and how we can overcome these situations and improve from them that I think will really helpfully give you perspective. The first is expectations. So expectations play a huge role into our overall outlook and happiness and perspective. When our expectations aren't met, no matter what our expectations are, when they aren't met, we are unhappy. And this phenomenon explains how, very objectively successful or people that have seemingly amazing lives can be miserable because their expectations about what they expect for themselves or their life or their day aren't being met. And they've done amazing studies about this, where they gave monkeys a banana or an apple, and they gave them one apple, and the monkey was very, very happy. And then they did another experiment where they gave the monkeys 2 apples, okay, and then they let the monkey sit with 2 apples, but then they took one away, and the monkey was going crazy. But it's ironic because both monkeys had the same thing. They both ended up with a net of 1 apple. But because one monkey's expectation was to have 2 apples, and then his reality was that he only had 1, he was frantic and miserable. And this happens a lot in life as well. When you set your expectations high and you don't have appreciation for your situation, but you have expectations about your situation, and those things aren't met, you're left feeling frustrated. And this happens a lot at the poker table. And the problem in poker is that our expectations make it impossible for many of us to be anything less than disappointed. So you're setting yourself up for a reverse free roll. You're setting yourself up to be disappointed. And this is why. most people, when they get all the money in, like this guy did here, okay, he has an overpair versus bottom pair, okay, he expects to win that pot, but his expectation isn't met with reality because the math says he's going to win something like 80% of the time, but his expectation is to win 100%. So anything less than winning will make him unhappy when the math says that he's only going to win 80% of the time. Now, this disparity, that 20%, is where all of his unhappiness lies, because that 20% is inevitably going to come. And by not setting yourself up for the expectation that you will lose this pot, it's a guaranteed mathematical fact, you will lose this pot something like 20% of the time, you're setting yourself up for mental disaster. So it's important when you get all the money in poker, or when you're in a spot where you're a favorite to win, that your expectation is based on your equity, meaning you expect to win as often as you are mathematically a favorite to win. So that's an important thing to understand. I feel like most people's expectations are binary. They're like, I'm a favorite, I'm going to win. I'm an underdog, I'm going to lose. And that's the way that people see life. They're very black and white and binary. But equity and poker does not work like that. So don't set yourself up for mental disaster. The second part of this equation is you might be saying, well, that 20% happens to me every time. First of all, no, it doesn't, right? Math is one thing, there's a lot of things in the world that are uncertain, like what's going to happen in the future. There's a lot of ambiguity about life. One thing that's very, very certain in the world is math. Fortunately, we can kind of like rely on that for some sense of certainty, right? If you flip a coin 1 billion times, it's a mathematical fact that it will be heads 50% or 50.1%, right? When you extrapolate a sample size long enough, things will regress to their mathematical expectation. So when you're a favorite in a pot, you will win as often as your equity says you will. But in the short term, that is not the case because there is something called variance. There's luck. If you flip a coin 1 billion times, it's very likely it'll be heads about half. But if you flip a coin 10 times, it could be heads 8 or 9 out of 10. Now, this could happen to you when you have an overpair and someone has bottom pair. They could win 3 or 4 times in a row. So even though if you set your expectations up to win 80% of the time, you might lose 3 in a row. And so if you're counting these sort of like, I won this one, or I lost this one, I'm going to win the next 4 because that's 80%. It doesn't work like that. So it's important also to take a step back with this and realize that you could run bad for a very long time. And so it's always important to, embrace the luck, be humble about it, and just not set your expectations too high, and always be grateful when you're winning because it makes the burden of losing a little bit easier. The last thing about expectations that I'd like to put out there that I have observed, and one of my readers, David, sent me an awesome email, a microstakes player online. He observed something really interesting that I find to be true in coaching a lot of clients that play something like 1-3 and 2-5 as well, that the reason decent players run into these absurd hands more frequently, he wrote to me, is because these hands simply get played more often. Now, in high stakes cash games, I think it's easier to take bad beats because if you have aces and someone has kings, you're not like necessarily begrudging the other person for how they played the hand. You're like, well, this is a standard cooler. I got unlucky. It is what it is. We both did our best, and you're like, whatever. But when the guy has a hand he shouldn't have, like the 9 deuce offsuit, and just totally buries you, there's not only the frustration of a bad beat, but there's the ego involved of like, this guy shouldn't have played that hand. He's such a fish. I deserve to win even more because he's so bad. And so there's all that ego that goes into the bad beat, which exacerbates the pain. And that's going to happen a lot more at small stakes because people are doing dumb shit. So you're going to have a lot more of that stuff going on, but that's built into the game. And you actually want that because this is what makes you able to win at those games. So it's what makes those games easier than the high stakes games where there's a bunch of wizards and really good players that make it very difficult to win because nobody's making mistakes. So it's important to take a step back and realize that mistakes are imperative to your win rate. They will allow you to win at poker. If you're playing poker to make money or for a job, you should be very grateful that people are making mistakes because this is what keeps you in business. So I think those are the perspectives of expectations. The second thing about this situation where I feel like there's room for improvement is accountability. And the fact that of everything that happened in this session that this guy played, right? That you played. Talking to you. Everything that happened in this session that you played. The one thing that was the focus, right? There was a 2-line email that you sent me. the focus was on something that you can't control. And where attention goes, energy flows. So your energy is being spent on something that you can't control. And that's got to be a very, very frustrating place to be, because ultimately it feels probably like the results of your session are completely out of your control. Like there's nothing you can do to change it, because your attention is spent on something that is completely irrelevant. There's nothing you can do to change that situation. In fact, you probably played the hand fine. And so that's leaving you really, really frustrated. And so we need to start by taking full accountability for our situation and focus our energy on things we can control and forget about the rest. So there's probably 20 other hands you played during this session, and why not focus on how to improve one of those hands? This is a really important concept, because you don't blame luck. You don't give credit to luck when you win. So why are you blaming luck when you lose? If you're going to blame bad luck when you lose, then you have to credit luck when you win. It can't be both ways, right? There's always something you can do to improve. And I think by taking full responsibility for the situation really brings the power back in your control and allows you to make improvements and have the perspective to focus your attention on something that you can actually channel your energy into to make improvements. It's kind of like tantamount to saying, your boss says, "Why are you late to work?" And what you're telling me in this email is basically, "I'm late to work because I hit every red light." That's total bullshit. You can get up earlier and be on time to work. And you could see how those two different approaches are completely polar opposites. One of them puts you in the victim seat where everything's out of your control. I couldn't do anything differently. I'm late to work. It's not my fault. The second one is empowering you to do something to actually be to work on time, which is getting up earlier or going to bed earlier or being more efficient in the morning. Those are all things you can do to change your situation. So accountability is huge here. And it's also important to realize that poker is a game of inches. And there are many situations that are going to impact your win rate and your bottom line. And by focusing only on the highlight reel, the big hands, you're missing those subtle details, which are ultimately going to determine whether you're a winner or a loser or how much you're winning at poker. So I have an exercise that I do that I think will illustrate this point with all of my clients, where a lot of them tell me hands when we're in a consult or on a call, and they want to tell me one or two hands they played and ask my opinion about it. That's very, very common. But I always tell them, to be an effective coach, you can't evaluate something like a sports team based off the highlight reel, right? If I wanted to coach basketball and make my team or my players better, I can't say, "Oh, show me the highlight reel on SportsCenter and the play where he slam dunked and the other one where they shot a three-pointer at the buzzer." I need to see the inbounds. I need to see the layups. I need to see the free throws. I need to see the rebounds. I need to see how well they're boxing out. All those things make up whether a team is winning or losing, or whether players are good or bad. And it's the same in poker. You can't focus on these highlight reel hands where there's one big hand you played. Sure, those are important. It's important to play the big points well in a sports game. That is important. But it's also important to do everything right to get you to the point where you're playing those big situations and scoring all the points in the interim. So the exercise I have them do is write down every single hand they play. And then they send that to me in an email, and I review every single hand, line by line, street by street, step by step, because that allows me to understand every single thing they're doing. And in the same vein, I would challenge you to look back at all the other 20 hands you played during that session and focus on those. Stop putting your attention on something that you can't control. Focus on what could you have done differently in those 20 different hands. Should you have been double barreling the turn when a card came that's better for your range? Should you have maybe folded to that bet on the river? Should you have 3-bet preflop instead of flat called to isolate the fish and get your fold equity? Like, those are the subtle ways that you're going to make an impact in your game, where poker is a game of inches that you're going to improve. Focus your energy on that and you'll see the results. The third thing I'd like to cover here is mindset. And just in general, man, this is a weak mindset. I hate to lay down the hammer, but it's some tough love that I think you need. I think the perspective to have here is, instead of worrying about things you can control and having this victim mentality, stop thinking that life is happening to you. but think that life is actually happening for you. So instead of looking at it like I'm a victim and I got so unlucky, I deserved to win this hand, but I didn't, the whole world is, conspiracy against me. Look at it like, what is this there to teach me? And I think this shift in perspective really opens things up and brings down that ego guard and allows you to actually improve as a person through the game of poker. So this is not always something that's easy to do, and I'm guilty of this all the time. I don't always have this perspective, but at least I strive to. In fact, in many times in my life, I've noticed it was very actually difficult to have this perspective when things happen and I feel like they're happening to me, whereas instead I challenge myself maybe afterwards sometimes always to look at like, how did this happen for me and how can I actually grow and become a better person from that experience. So in poker, when it's like you run bad, maybe it's not there to the world isn't conspiring against you and you're not there to be the most unlucky person alive, but maybe it's there to teach you, wow, this is a challenge to make me a stronger, more resilient person, to be able to handle adversity. It's challenging me to see, not how many times life or poker is going to kick me down, but it's a brick wall that's there to test how bad I really want it. It's there to make me stronger mentally, to make me more resilient, have more mental fortitude. Maybe it's there to make you realize that, while you got unlucky in this one hand, luck doesn't exist in a vacuum. And there's more to your luck. There's more to this subject of luck in your life than just what happens at the poker table. And maybe it's just there, just maybe, to teach you the fact that just because you got unlucky in one meaningless, trivial hand of poker, that in the game of life, you've already won. Because you've been dealt a winning hand. You're probably born in the first world, watching this on your $600 smartphone. And that big blind that you're so upset about losing is the amount of money that someone lives off for a day in half of the world. Lives on, one big blind in your game per day. Just stop for a second and reflect about that. This discretionary money that you're throwing away is money that you have because in large part because you were born into the world where you were given an opportunity to make this money, not because you were not born into impoverished situation or to disease and famine where you and your family are living off $5 or one big blind per day. So maybe in the game of life you've already won and you've gotten really lucky. And maybe that experience that you're having at the poker table, however painful temporarily, is there to teach you that instead of focusing your energy on this meaningless, trivial amount of luck that's happening, you should use your talents and energy to make an impact in the world to people that were actually dealt a bad beat in life. Thank you for watching. Cheers.